Good evening everyone, and welcome to the University of Melbourne's Water Security Seminar, where tonight we'll be discussing gender equality in the water sector. My name's Sharon Davis. I'm a Senior Enterprise Fellow with the University of Melbourne, and it's my pleasure to be your MC this evening. It's a topic that's incredibly close to my heart, and I think we'll have the chance to have a really exciting and interesting conversation together today. So before I start the panel discussion, I'd like to begin the evening by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land of which we meet, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to their elders, past and families, past, present and emerging. So just by way of introduction to this seminar tonight, as an Enterprise Senior Fellow, my role includes building a bridge between academia, government and industry, and through those connections to create more positive outcomes for the sector as a whole. And through this role, I've chaired a number of our water security seminars where we aim to bring together thought leaders from academia, industry and government to provide evidence-based insights and raise the quality of debate around these key issues. And for me, tonight, after working 20 years in the water sector, tonight's discussion is a topic particularly close to my heart, where we're considering gender. Particularly close to my heart. And it's important to acknowledge that when we're considering gender, we're talking about all genders: men, women, trans, and gender diverse people. Gender equality is about equality for everyone. Many of you will know the issue of gender equality in our sector is something that has been the topic of increased focus over the last few years in particular. And we're now seeing a change, but there's still some way to go. And tonight we're really lucky to have an outstanding panel with us to discuss how we continue to make progress on this important topic. So, what I'd like to do is introduce the panel members and ask them to come up and take their seats as I do that, if that's okay. So I'll start with Dr. Marion Neal. Marion is the Partnerships and Knowledge Manager of the Australian Water Partnership. She leads AWP's national and international partnerships and manages knowledge sharing and outreach. She has 20 years of water resource management experience and has a PhD in water justice and governance. Pat McCafferty is the Managing Director of Yarra Valley Water with over 30 years experience. He has experience working in the USA water sector and advising the Australian Government as part of the National Water Initiative. Pat is a member of the Leadership Oversight Committee for the Victorian Women in Water Leadership Program. Bridget Thakkar, I hope I said that right, Bridget. Close enough? Okay, great. Leads the People and Safety Group for South East Water and is responsible for overseeing key people functions including diversity and inclusion, employee experience, safety and wellbeing. She brings a wealth of experience in the people field gained across various industries including construction and manufacturing. She joined South East Water in 2012. Sarah Harbridge. Sarah is the Executive Director of Water for the Office for Suburban Development. I'm rushing because I'm so excited about getting to this panel discussion. Sarah is the Executive Director of the Office of Suburban Development in the Precincts and Suburbs Group at Victorian State Government's Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions. She works across government to positively change Victoria's future. Sarah has worked on a number of water reform initiatives, the most recent being the award-winning Water for Victoria. And finally, Mike Stewardson. Professor Mike Stewardson leads the Environmental Hydrology and Water Resources Group at the Melbourne School of Engineering. He's also the lead academic for the Water, Environment and Agriculture Program in MSE and the director of the Mallee Regional Innovation Centre. So thank you to our fabulous panel for joining us. Now I'm going to go over. Okay, so as a reminder, we will have the opportunity for you to ask questions through Slido or through the microphone, but to get things going, I'm going to kick off with some questions to our panel members. So I'm going to start with Marion. Marion, we've all heard the term gender equality, but what is it and what does it look like when we have it?
Right, starting with an easy question. Let me just start off by saying equality is more than just gender equality, and gender equality is more than just women's rights and their responsibility. I'm an idealist, so for me, equality equates to equal opportunity. In an ideal world, we would all have an equal opportunity to choose, to participate, and to contribute to society. But obviously in the real world, there's a myriad of factors that get in the way of this. There's bias and discrimination based on race, religion, age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, and social and cultural norms all get in the way of this and result in a very uneven playing field. So all these factors, not just gender equality or inequality, prevents us from achieving this equality of opportunity ideal. And of course there's intersectionality between all of these different variables and dimensions that compound the barriers towards achieving equal opportunity. So we can work on many of the processes and the proxies to achieve equality of opportunity, such as quotas and representation, but I don't think we must lose sight of the ideal, which is to achieve equality in opportunity.
Great framing to start the discussion. So my next question is for you, Pat. From your perspective, and experience in the water sector, including as Managing Director of Yarra Valley Water since 2014, how has the sector changed in relation to issues of gender equality, and what have been the key drivers of that change?
Yeah, thanks Sharon, and good evening everyone. Look, I think we were a long way behind back in 2014, but it's fair to say that we've picked up a fair bit of momentum and ground in terms of gender equality since then. It's not, obviously, it's never a finished issue, but we certainly have come a long way. If I think about some of the drivers for that, can you hear me? Some of the drivers for that, in 2014, the new government of Victoria made it very clear that a high priority was gender equality, and the Minister for Water, Neville, has also made it very clear, and particularly through things like board appointments. We've got to 50-50 across the water sector in terms of gender equality. We get a letter of expectations every year about what the government is looking for from the water corporations, and I do think government sees water corporations as state-owned entities in the community as vehicles for helping drive positive change as well. And so the letter of expectations reinforces what's important in terms of government policy, and we certainly get that indication around diversity and inclusion. And so they're very tangible things. The government has also, through the Minister, created the Women in Water program called Insight, which is a very unique program to look at the system that we currently have in water utilities and catchment management authorities to see what we can do about the system to ensure that we enhance our gender equality. At Yarra Valley Water, we created our first diversity and inclusion strategy in 2015. A lot of this data is replicated across other water utilities, particularly I think in the metro area where we've been able to sort of take some great ground. But for Yarra Valley Water, we moved from a board which was 33% female to male to 55%. Our executive team moved from 17% to 43%. The direct reports to executives from 26% to 40%. And our engineers, female engineer representation went from 31 to 38%. So it's still work in progress, but even if you look at the engineering cohort, that's fair. That's a pretty good outcome in the sense of the number of engineering graduates we're actually coming out of the universities. So a lot of things around interventions on workplace flexibility, Women in Water network at Yarra Valley Water, and those sorts of things. But overall, I think we've got very much the encouragement and authorisation from the government, and collectively the Australian Water Utilities signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals as well. Gender equality, equality goal number 5 is very important. But we even think about water aid and the role that water plays,
in developing countries and how women can't get education because they're having, most of their time is spent trying to secure water
for their families. So,
it extends into that as well. So,
yeah,
that's probably enough for now.
Great, thank you. Bridget, Pat alluded to the Executive Leadership Program for Women in Water, which was announced by Victorian State Government late in 2019. And at that time, it was announced that women represented 20% of managing directors and chief executive positions in water corporations and catchment management authorities. From your perspective, what do you think are the key reasons for the lack of participation of women in senior roles in these organisations?
Look, I think organisations like Yarra Valley and City West, we're engineering businesses at our core, and as Pat alluded to, the representation of women coming out of engineering with engineering degrees is low. It's about 13%. So I think that's the lazy or easy answer, is that the pipelines is not very big, so it's tricky. I think the more real answer, the harder answer, is that there is bias at play in promotion decisions and recruitment decisions, and it takes a lot of effort to combat that structural bias. This is something that we've been focusing on at South East Water as well, trying to increase our representation, and we, as part of unpacking what was going on in our system, we interviewed the top 50 female leaders in our business late last year to work out from their perspective, what were we doing well and not so well, and that's highlighted to us a number of structural things in our system that are stopping that representation from being as good as it could be. So even things like, we're not great at offering up leadership roles that are part-time. We have come a long way in terms of how flexible our workplaces are, but at the moment they still, in a lot of parts, even our business, they can be pretty traditional, that 9 to 5. So I think, when we get our workplaces to be a bit more progressive and modern in terms of understanding that traditional 9 to 5, very fixed workplace just doesn't work in the modern work. So I think we've got some work to do in that flexibility space as well.
Sarah, a leaky pipeline. We've often heard about it, and it's often cited as the reason that there are not more women in senior leadership roles. And I'm just wondering what your experience was as an early career engineer, and how did that impact on your career trajectory?
So I went to university to study environmental engineering back in 1991 at the University of New South Wales. It was the first year that course was actually offered. I thought, I want to make a difference to the world and help improve the environment. So all very, wanting to, through a career in engineering, make a difference. So I was pretty surprised when I got to the University of New South Wales, and there were 30 people in the course, environmental engineering, really high cut-off, by the way, because I think people were attracted to the environmental aspect of it. And I got there thinking I'll be the only woman doing this course, but I have a prop to show you all of the women that were doing the course. And there we are on the cover of Engineers Australia magazine. It was such a big deal that we were put on the cover of the magazine in 1991. So the poor 10 boys doing the course with us got completely left out, and all the women got to be on the front cover. But the thing is, my mum found that a few years ago and took a photo and sent it to me, and I looked at it, and do you know what? So high achieving women willing to take a bet on an innovative new form of engineering, and none of the women in that photo actually pursued a career in traditional engineering. So over time, we all dropped out for different reasons of engineering. That's not to say that people in that photo haven't gone on to achieve great things elsewhere, but it just hasn't been in the engineering field. So for me, my journey started, I went and knocked on the door of a big engineering firm that still exists today, said, can I do my industrial training with you? They said, yep, sure thing, what a novelty, we've got a woman, that's great. They offered me a job afterwards. What I did was, I was the start of stormwater management from a water quality environmental perspective. So whenever it would rain, I would crawl up 800 millimetre pipes with a computer, which around cost $15,000. And I would download data and water quality bottles, blah, 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 all by myself, and take them back to the office, do all the analysis. Anyway, I do that. I did lots of modelling. I moved around a few different firms. And then there's this memory that I have that will never leave me. And it was not that particular firm, but another one that still exists. It was the Brisbane office manager. His daughter was finishing high school, and I said, oh, do you think your daughter will do engineering? And he looked me in the eye. I don't know what he was thinking, and he said, women weren't made to be engineers. So, and I was just wondering today, before I was coming here, I wonder if he's still in the workplace. So it's fantastic to have all of, the government's done great things for gender equality, and it's great to have systems and processes in place for part-time work and structural barriers like that. But what is actually the culture in our organisations and in the engineering sector, when you get really down to it? I don't think it's the people in this room, it's the people who aren't ever going to register to come to one of these events. Like, what are their views and attitudes? And how can that change? A lot of work goes into how can we get more women into STEM? Like, there's 20 women that took a punt on STEM, did really well, graduated, and then couldn't find a place because of the culture in that sector. So that was my experience. I went on to public policy, where I worked with Sharon, and stayed in water because I love it so much. But I wouldn't call myself an engineer day to day today.
Sarah, and I think sharing our experiences and talking about those and exploring why that's the case and what needs to change is such a powerful part of this conversation. Because sometimes I reflect that I think as women, we often share these experiences with each other. We don't often have the opportunity to talk about it in broader forums and share that with men who are frequently in the positions of power and decision-making sort of roles. So thank you for sharing that, Sarah. Mike, I'm going to ask you a question before I turn to Slido and also see if anyone wants to ask a question with a mic. And it's really around the universities and reflecting on the fact that they have amongst the lowest levels of women in senior leadership roles. And within Melbourne School of Engineering, if we look at those statistics, we've got around 11% of professors are women and around 18% of associate professors. And I'm just wondering your reflections on why you think that's the case, having been in that system for a long time, and what you see as the pathway to equality.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I guess firstly, I think universities got a particular role to play in addressing this because we've heard about the pipeline, we're at the start of the pipeline in a professional sense, although we can trace that then back to school and selection of subjects at school to being in an engineering discipline, then go look at selection of the STEM subjects. So yeah, we have a chance to create culture and an idea around what the values are of being an engineer, and to think about the importance of gender diversity and gender equality as part of our graduates. So I think it's an important role to play, and we've also got an important role to play in terms of drawing people into the profession through our student recruitment processes. So wherever we're doing student recruitment, that the need to be conscious of providing an attractive career opportunity for both men and women. Now, why is there a problem? So I think one of the particular features of universities and academia is the very linear hierarchy. So the process of progressing through your career. So you go from a level A position as a postdoc up to a level E as a professor. That's 5 levels, and the progression is pretty disciplined and clear, and you have 5 years at each level, and so there's a lot of memory in the system. And so the people who are professors now probably started their careers 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So it's a slow train to turn around. So one option is to actually have women-only positions at senior levels, and we've been doing that quite a bit recently. I think that's a good way to approach to take in the short term to deal with the senior issue at the senior levels. I don't think it sort of fixes the underlying structural problem of actually, drawing people through the pipeline. And there's a well-established problem in the science area of the leaky pipe. It's well kind of evidenced. So I think whilst sort of the creating women-only positions is a good sort of measure, it's actually destroying what is a fairly limited pool of people from other organisations. So there's a bit of shifting people around. So it's about getting people, getting women up through the career progression and making sure that all the barriers are addressed, that there's the biases are tackled. A small, tiny bias, because there's 5 promotions, but actually within that there's all the little opportunities of going on the panel for this, or being the keynote speaker, or co-authoring a paper, and so on, which all feed into your career prospects. So, just a slight shift in the odds in all those different situations actually lead to a very bad outcome at the senior level. So I think that's the problem, and I think the solution is just a really careful effort to support women through the through those career progression. Actually, at level B now, we've got more women than men, so in engineering, which is, I think, is a great achievement. And the target is to do the same thing at level C by 2025. It does push the changes at level E way off into the future, and it's kind of disappointing how far off they are. I mean, our aspirations at level E have growing from 11%, what they are now. You gave the figure to 20% by 2025. Which seems a little bit too modest, but equally, it's hard to see how that can be changed more quickly without just poaching people from other institutions. Yeah, I think it's tricky. It's not tricky, it's solvable, but it takes time.
Right, thank you. I'm going to turn to Slido now, and we've got a question which I think I'd be really interested to hear from the panel, and be looking to see who multiple people might want to say something. But it's a good point to say there's been some effort in the last few years towards diversity, but diversity doesn't necessarily lead to inclusion. And what are your views on how to ensure inclusion? Sure.
I think this, goes to the point that I was trying to make in my opening statements, is that, yes, we want to get a diversity, of perspectives and people involved in whatever we're working in, but not to lose sight of the why, So I think we really need to try and understand it's not just about getting numbers and getting the pipeline, and it's like, why do we want that diversity? And it's because there's strength in diversity, there's richness in diversity. Getting different perspectives and opinions and worldviews helps us tackle complex problems that have got multiple different ways of trying to solve them. So if we don't have that diversity in the room at the table, then we're going to miss out on opportunities to solve some of these complex issues that we have. And the vehicle for that is genuine inclusion. So, how do we ensure, yes, we want to get the diversity right. We need to include people in the conversations, at the table, negotiation table, in decisions, but not to lose sight of why we're wanting to do that.
Yeah, if I could just build on the why for the water sector, I mean, if you just take Our Valley Water, for instance, we supply 2 million people with an essential service, which is pretty fundamental to their life and their health and well-being. If we don't look like that customer base, then we're not going to be serving them as well as we could. We're not going to be in tune with their needs.
And picking up on the point of inclusion, to get the best out of someone, they absolutely need to feel like they're included as well. So I totally agree with that. I think the business case for diversity and inclusion is such a no-brainer. It's sad that we still have to keep talking about it.
Anyone else want to? No?
Just to build on Pat's point about the business case for diversity as well, I think what we've learned in the last 6 months is that everyone knows the business case, right? That if you have lots of different brands on a problem, then you're going to get better outcomes. What we haven't done as good a job of is selling the benefits to the individual decision maker on that diversity. So if you look at, for example, our typical engineering manager, making sure that that person, usually a he, usually middle-aged, white, having them truly understand the benefit on their own performance of their team if they have diverse team members, I think is where we've got the opportunity to really refine that message.
And I do think that for me, this issue is something that's close to my heart, because I've seen and personally experienced situations where you might be in the room, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually heard. And I know that even just as I look out now, I can see other women nodding. And the number of times that I've seen women make points in meetings which seem to have apparently not occurred until someone else, usually a man, makes that same point, and then suddenly that point has traction. And I've seen it, and that's not a hierarchical thing. I've seen very senior women in that position. And so it's something that if we're all aware of it, we have some chance of actually dealing with it, because we can call it out, we can acknowledge it, we can make changes.
I think that the diversity piece is just the first step. The inclusion piece is where you actually bring it to life.
Great. Now I'm going to go a bit crazy and see, does anyone out there I've got some Slido questions, but I just wanted to test. Does anyone want to give it a spin with a microphone? Feeling energised, brave, enthusiastic, disruptive? Oh, yep, great.
Hello. Women have more time to participate. Women do more work at being typically domestic. And what I'm wondering is whether an organisation might feel like it had some responsibility to enter the discourse on that. I mean, that might look like you're entering a personal domain and not the firm's business, but it's a thing that makes a real difference to whether or not a woman can participate. You're coming up with all these programs which invite and pull, but if women don't have the capacity to take up the invitation, then that's...
Nodding enthusiastically. Annabelle wrote a quarterly essay on just this topic not long ago about how men's lives really haven't changed in the last 50 years. It's a 40 to 50 hour work week and a little bit of domestic duties. Women's lives have changed really dramatically in that time. Most households with a traditional mum and dad, they're both working in some capacity, and those domestic duties just have not, the distribution hasn't really changed. Something I think absolutely is a corporate responsibility to wade into this territory, and something South East Water's done recently is scrap primary and secondary care labels on parental leave and offer any gender 14 weeks paid leave when the child is born to use at any stage in the first year of that child's life. So those labels we were finding were just really unhelpful. Usually it was the mother taking that extended period of time off. They were getting impacts on their super because of that time off. And what I've been loving seeing is talk about role models, the new dads coming through, the next generation of dads want to be more involved in their kids' lives, and they're really happy to ask for part-time work, and I'm really encouraged by that shifting on the home front as well.
What I really like about that suggestion is it's kind of a taboo topic, really, because you wouldn't normally talk about, like you say, it's sort of a personal issue, but it's obviously got big ramifications for the workplace. So I think a lot of people would be quite confronted by the topic, and it would stimulate a discussion that would then raise a lot of other issues that would otherwise necessarily be raised. So
do you think a lot of women would be confronted by that?
Okay, so a lot of and I think therein lies the problem. It's the people that aren't here that are the issue. And when we see a sort of gender imbalance in the room, not as much as I expected, which is good, but and so men have to be part of this discussion, and I think it could be quite provocative, and make all these things make people reflect, make men reflect, and understand get a little bit more insight as to the inequity that's embedded in the way we do things now.
I think it's extending too into
The whole person relationship that organisations have now with the people that work there, and who would have thought that we'd be leaning into all sorts of issues around domestic violence, and I mean, corporations and the expectation of people now of organisations to actually lean into all of those areas. It gets a bit blurry,
but it's really all still around
wanting to ensure that people can fulfil
what they're capable
of fulfilling and be the best that they can be. But it's certainly, when I first started in the water industry, it was about safety, and it was about boots and hats. And now we're well and truly into a much more holistic
perspective of health and well-being, mental illness, you name it.
Great, thank you. Questions are coming thick and fast now. I want to roll two together and just explore kind of two concepts here. One is the question around, of all the conscious and unconscious biases, which ones are still the most significant in recruitment? Let me just test if you feel that you could, if people want to deal with that together with another question, which I think is a really interesting one, which is how do we balance perceptions of best for the job versus appointed to meet a target?
I'll have a crack at the second one. Look, targets, people have a different relationship with targets, but I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that we're coming from a long way behind, and so. Thank you. That's right. We're coming from a long way behind, so they have a role to play, and they're totally legitimate. That doesn't mean that you're not going to get people who are absolutely capable of fulfilling the role, and I've seen people, in our organisation just shine when we've given, when we've shone a light on this, we've given people more opportunities. When you have a target, it changes the way you think about everything all the way through the system, and it challenges the way you do things. So I've never had an issue with it in terms of perceptions. And let's face it, without them shifting the dial, it's just going to take way too long to get to where we need to get to.
So I was lucky enough to be at the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning when Lisa Neville came in as the Water Minister and wanted to refresh the boards of the water corporations, and she was very adamant that she wanted 50% females on those boards. I can tell you that at the time there was a lot of feedback back to the department, not to the minister herself, that there weren't the numbers out there, there wasn't the capability within all the women to actually fill the boards 50% female. So that was what was going on, and to her credit, great leadership to her, she probably got wind of that but said, no, I'm continuing with this. And lo and behold, 6 years later, I think the water corps are in pretty good shape, right? Yeah. So I think that all of it just sort of like totally debunks this idea that there actually isn't a pipeline of women out there ready to step into these roles. It's more maybe the way that decision makers are framing the idea of who's best fit for the job is not quite right.
And sadly, I think I read the other day that in corporate Australia, the gender equality on boards is going backwards, which is interesting.
That's not great. Sorry, I'm excited. There's so many good questions. There's two here that I want to try rolling together again and then floating the balloon and seeing which the panel wants to tackle or your thoughts on it. And they're sort of related. So one is, what would happen these days if a water corp or firm, if someone said women weren't made to be engineers? So what would happen? And the other question I want to float is, can anyone share a success story in changing traditional male engineers' minds re the importance of gender equality?
I guess we should start. You want to start?
Yeah, to the second one. When do can you read the second one, please?
The second one was, can anyone share a success story in changing traditional male engineers' minds re the importance of gender equality?
So that happens when they have daughters. Really. All of a sudden that impact is quite tangible and it's personal and, but I want my daughter growing up in a world that's equal. And I think, again, this is our realisation has been recently that we really need to make it as personal as we can and leverage whatever works, but make that impact felt. And if people don't get the benefits of diversity, I think in this context, in this day and age, they're not paying attention. Like, the evidence is there. It's just about how we help them draw that back to what's really practical and meaningful for them.
And in terms of the first one, if someone did say that, my expectation would be that it would be called out very quickly by whoever's in the room. And this is the sort of thing that you cannot step over at all. And it starts from the top, and it's about expressing what we stand for. And the expectation is in our organisation, I'm sure the other water utilities, that is the case.
Oh, Sarah.
I just want to say something positive. So when that person said that to me, was a while ago, that magazine that my colleagues and I were on the cover of was actually still publishing letters to the editor as well that said, this is my argument for why women shouldn't be engineers. So I would get that magazine because I did the right thing and signed up as a undergraduate at university. But I just wanted to say that I was not very hopeful, but then I went to the Engineers Australia International Women's Day event on Thursday. I think a few of you were probably there. And it just made me think, whilst there's still a long way to go in engineering and women's involvement in engineering, that the industry has come a long way. And it's always good to have gratitude for the gains that have been made, but not to lose sight of the fact that there are more gains to be made in the future.
I want to change tack a little bit. And actually, we've talked a lot about the importance of diversity in the sector, and we've really been focused very much domestically. But I was really keen to get from you, Marion, that gender equality issues are featuring really strongly in international development. And I wanted to, in terms of the issues that relate to gender equality and though in development and water, What are those issues and why is it important for women participating in the sector? Just looking at that through that lens.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I think the key thing to remember in international development is we're there to try and make a positive difference in people's lives and livelihoods. So, you know, that's our sort of goal in this space. And water is a really interesting, entry point into making a difference in multiple sectors and at multiple levels in a complex system. You know, from household all the way through, you know, to communities, to river basins, to countries, regions. So water is a connector, and you know, because it's a connector and it's so interrelated to all these different sectors and levels, it also is the core of a lot of our sort of, you know, big global water challenges that we're trying to deal with in the development space. Climate change, sustainable development, peace and security. And these are very, you know, complex and multifaceted challenges that require multiple perspectives. So, you know, just to reinforce the point that I'm trying to make is that, you know, if we're dealing with these complex systems, which have got so many different dimensions to them, we need that diversity of perspective to be included. And, you know, in the international development space, women are often sort of classified as the vulnerable group. And I think it's an important element just to talk about, because it links to the question from the floor also about, you know, women having time to participate in other things. You know, so there's a lost opportunity for women that are responsible for, you know, carrying and fetching water to supply households. So there's a loss of opportunity in education. There's a loss of opportunity in the security around land ownership and accessing, you know, financial services and resources. So addressing water access of a good quality is one little part of the puzzle that we're trying to solve in the international development space. And, you know, often a woman's understanding of a local water problem and its solution is spot on. We just need to ensure that they have the opportunity to participate in the discussion, articulate the problem, you know, come up with solutions, be heard in the discussions. So, you know, including women and being more inclusive in general, and giving them agency to move beyond being a vulnerable group, but also agency in decision making, being involved in the processes around identifying those transformative outcomes from a development perspective is really very important. And it's through those processes that we can actually make a difference, which is what we're trying to do in international development.
Erin? Okay, I'm going to test the floor. Anyone else want to ask a question in person? No? Okay. Still use Slido. All right, that's there for you. So I'm quite keen to explore the issue of the recently passed Victorian Gender Equality Act. So I don't know if you're aware, but Victorian State Government passed, I think the Act was enacted on the 26th of February this year. And I wanted to ask you, Bridget, if you could please tell us what are the implications and opportunities of the sector as a consequence of that new Act?
Yeah, I think any sort of legislative changes like that Act are a step in the right direction. If change isn't happening as fast as it should be, then that's really helpful. Pat mentioned you guys had a diversity and inclusion plan for 5 years. Southeast Water is similar, I think. You know, the expectations on us are really clear, not just gender diversity, but diversity more broadly. And we have targets that we've imposed on ourselves and action plans that we do every year, and we monitor our progress on those, and we hold ourselves to account for those. So I think a lot of the water corps, I think, are in the same space, that they are making progress in the space regardless. But, you know, it doesn't hurt to have the Act, I think, there to help with benchmarking and just making sure that that commitment is always there. It helps to fill a gap. The WGEA is for the private sector, so it helps fill a gap that public sector don't need to report on at the moment.
And can I ask a question related to that, which is one that's come in, which is around when you're seeking employees that they disclose their gender, is demanding that? Does that constitute an unreasonable invasion of their privacy, and how will you measure targets without that information?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think our landscape is shifting around our understanding of gender as a construct, and I wonder if when my children grow up, they're 1 and 3 at the moment, that they'll think it was really weird that we had gender targets at all, because it's not just about male and female anymore. And so yeah, I think it's an interesting space, and I've seen some companies do, you know, 40-40 targets, and then the balance is, you know, not identified. Or so that's one way of seeing organisations addressing that. Others is just to remove it altogether. But again, when you've got those structural inequity like we do in the engineering space, that has consequences as well.
Okay. Oh, we have a question, a microphone question here.
I'm interested in how the water sector, because I'm acknowledging the great work that the water industry itself does around its own diversity policies and plans. And how does it actually influence its network? So when I say its network, its development network, its consultancy network, its supply chain network, and influence their gender diversity and inclusion policies and getting change throughout their whole networks, and if there's anything that you're doing in that space.
Thanks, Susie. Yeah, sure. I think that's been one of the things around committing to the SDGs that has made us think more broadly about our ecosystem and our influence, and you know, and social procurement, and supply chain risks, and modern slavery, and you know, all those sorts of things are now being considered. So, you know, we are definitely engaging our major partners around their policies on diversity and so forth. It's been interesting lately that I think some of our smaller suppliers are struggling a little bit with, you know, we probably went a bit hard, a bit too quickly, and some of these small organisations just can't manage the overhead of, you know, I mean, for instance, even things like local content and local jobs and all sorts of stuff. So we're having to sort of scale back a little bit and partner with them and bring them along. And what we are finding though is that, you know, people are up for it, and we're, I guess we're, educating is the wrong word, but we're engaging in a very positive way to shift the dial on these conversations. And we are seeing that positive changes are happening. I think the biggest issue for us at the moment from a water sector point of view, if we just narrow it down to gender, is our blue collar workforce. And, you know, so all the water utilities have been, you know, trying to pursue getting, you know, more apprentices, female apprentices out there. One of the big things I think with all of this is visibility. People need to see themselves in roles, whatever the role is. They need to see people like themselves. And the more that we can get that happening and get case studies out there and promote it and shine a light on it, the better. But yeah, we've got a lot of opportunity because, you know, we spend a lot of money and we have a lot of influence. We've got to do it the right way, of course, with good governance, but we can partner very powerfully to make change.
I might, oh, absolutely.
My microphone working? Just to add to that, so the Australian Water Partnership has 210 at the moment Australian partners. That covers the broad breadth and depth of the sort of the water management, water resource management, water sector of Australia. And what we do to try and influence our networks is we provide opportunities for our Australian partners to participate in training on GESI. We've actually just added the D, so it's gender equality, disability and social inclusion. But obviously from very much a international development engagement perspective. And then the other thing that we do to influence our networks is that all the activities that we fund, that our partners implement, you know, when they go out into the Indo-Pacific region to assist people in sustainable water management, is all the sort of concepts and proposals that we receive have to go through a series of filters, and one of the filters is gender and social inclusion, gender equality and social inclusion. So that's an essential criterion that we look at, and we don't fund activities that don't actually address that in a meaningful way. So both around representation and parity, but also in what is the gender-sensitive outcome in the development work that we're trying to do.
So we've got a couple of questions, to Frank, but just before that, I guess I wanted to just reflect on this issue of the importance of role models and being able to, you can't be what you can't see. And one of the things that I reflect on is when Sarah and I worked together on Water for Victoria, one of the things we were really mindful about was the images we were putting in that document. And it's no accident that the images are not all blokes, because that, that means something when you actually think about what you're projecting and what images people see, and the importance of that, I think, is sometimes lost on people, but it's so important in so many different ways. So, Frank, you had a question?
Sure. When there's a change of leadership, you get important changes of culture, and we get changes in processes and changes of how we do things. But often there's also a change in what we do and how we start to create our targets of those actions. So there's been an interesting discussion around about how we do things and the importance of equity, and it is really important. But my question is, if there were to be a change, how might that affect what we end up doing? How we cast the water problems differently, and do we tackle the same sort of problems? So just thinking about whether this change will also affect how we start to problematise the space.
Does anyone want to? I mean, there are so many examples more broadly. In fact, there was a great example at the Engineers Australia lunch last week about the importance of women, diverse views when you're thinking about problem solving and design. But does anyone want to?
I mean, of course it's going to make a difference to how you articulate the problem if you've got different perspectives in the room, because there's going to be another dimension to understanding the problem that you didn't have before. So your problem-scape is going to be framed differently because you've got different perspectives framing what they think the problem is. And then because you've got that, then you've got different framings in your solution scape as well. So it's absolutely, there's going to be totally different ways of understanding problems. And I think also on a process side, it has to be deliberative, it has to be participatory. So, the way you do things and the way you understand and articulate problems is going to be changed.
Just checking in on your question there. So when you were talking about leadership, were you talking about leadership at the top of an organisation changing, and then what the organisation focuses on changes, or just?
What I'm talking about is and it really reflected a conversation I had with Sharon the other day. I'm just wondering whether a more feminist or a more female orientation to the problem means that we think about the problem differently. And of course we will, but how might it play out differently? Will we end up tackling different sorts of problems, and what might they be?
Really interesting question. I think, for us, say our board chair is female. We've got a male MD. We've got many different perspectives at the table, and I think that's the most important point about diversity and what you get from that. I think
the issues that we deal with as a sector the challenges and the opportunities are pretty obvious. Climate change, population growth, the ones up in lights, and then change in customer expectations, digital transformation, some of those other things that then come to the fore. So I've not experienced it. Maybe I've been too embedded in it to notice it, other than to say that my own experience as an executive moving up through the water utility saw a very significant, I've experienced a very significant change in the tone of our conversations around the executive table. When I first became an executive at Yarra Valley Water, we had one female GM, and I can tell you now that the lack of testosterone now in the room and the greater focus that we have, and different perspectives has just been, it's been magic.
But it hasn't changed what you do, it just changed how you've done it.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. My long-winded answer to your question, yeah.
A concrete example, I think, that is a slight change in the articulation of the problem and therefore the solution is, for example, when you're trying to understand in-stream flows and the height of the flow in a river, for example, and you're dealing with accessibility. So, the women are going and trying to access water from the river. So understanding the height of the river in your modelling and your data collection is really important. So I guess that's one way that's a feminised approach. I don't know if I'm super comfortable with that. But, it just adds another layer of reality, of application to the problem. It's understanding the end user as well. So, when you do have, women as a vulnerable group as the end user in mind, then the way you're trying to understand what you're doing in the hydrological modelling space will be very different.
And I think in the development space too, Marianne, there are examples where women's needs in wash outcomes, for example, water and sanitation, can be radically different to men because of personal safety issues in terms of accessing remote latrines, what that means going out in the night. There are kind of potentially real life and death issues for women if those factors aren't taken into consideration. And the extent to which there'd be a full understanding of that without women in the room, I guess, one can extrapolate that possibly you wouldn't get the best outcome without those voices. Sarah, you had something to add, and I think we've got one more question, and then...
Oh, I just had an example which is not so much in the engineering space, but definitely the water utility space. And that's the work coming out of the Family Violence Royal Commission a few years ago. Marcia Neave made a recommendation about how water corporations, and you're probably more across this than me, Pat, but how water corporations do or don't share personal information between customers that might be husband and wife. So the story is that there were instances where women were experiencing family violence. They were moving away from their husbands. Their husbands were then contacting water corporations or other financial institutions to track down where their wives were and then perpetrate more violence against the women. But bringing the women's voice into the arena through the Royal Commission led to the water sector actually leading a lot of really great work on just that sort of customer interface and how they deal with customers and therefore keep women safer.
Good summary.
Now, I am actually mindful of time, so I think what I'll do is call the panel session to a close now. But we do have drinks and nibbles available, so we can. You're more than welcome to catch the panel members afterwards. he says, offering their time afterwards generously, whichever ones you can get. I'd like to thank all of the panellists for participating tonight. It's really great to have such a broad range of perspectives across government, university sector, development, and of course water corporations. And I think that was the thinking, to really get a breadth across the sector, which I think is really valuable. So thank you so much for your participation, and thank you all for coming. I'm mindful that there's, of course, with the coronavirus, there's different factors at play in terms of people being out and about. So recognise that, and just acknowledge that that's an important thing to think about. Please stay. If you'd like to participate in a bit more networking after the event, you're more than welcome. There's food and nibbles down the back there. I wanted to let you know that the next Water Security Series event will be on the 15th of April. And that will be focused on urban water issues and asking the question, are our cities ready for a diversified water supply in the future? So another really great topic. So pop that in your diaries. And thank you again for everyone for attending. Thank you.